I want to give a big shout out to SedSec and Daryl Howard 3914 in the video where we're creating the onboarder automation. They provided some great feedback, which is, hey, you didn't really mention anything about securing this Logic app. And they also provided some suggestions that I recommend y'all go to the video and look in the comments. And overall, I think it's a great suggestion in general for all of my videos. I am always going to miss something. And oftentimes I see people commenting like, hey, you could do this too, or maybe you could try this and things like that. So after you watch a video, go through the comments, see if there's definitely going to be some gems there that you can learn from. But shout out to y'all for the feedback. So today we're going to run through some suggestions of how you could, one, improve this automation, because I did make it really quick. I should research my videos a lot more, but honestly, most of the time I just brain dump stuff that I know. I wish I had more time to dedicate to YouTube, but I don't. But anyway, some improvements and overall ways of securing. So the Logic app itself, you can have IP restrictions as to where it can be triggered from, which is important. And I think another big thing is if you are working with HTTP requests or potentially even building out an onboarding API, so you have an API with calls that can update a user, remove a user, add a user, I would recommend using something like Azure API Management, APIM, which is going to give you a suite of security options there, instead of just having like a single call here. And then you can incorporate your Logic app to APIM as well. When you create a user, I believe this is a suggestion that Daryl gave, is set it to disabled. I had it enabled by default. That way I didn't have to manually enable it, so we could sign in just for the demonstration purpose. But you're going to want to have it set to disabled most likely. And then this really depends on company by company, but maybe a supervisor has to say, okay, set to enabled, or maybe you have a 24-hour period where it's like, it's not enabled for 24 hours or something like that, right? But yeah, you want to make sure that account is enabled for sure, like with an additional step. And yeah, it depends company to company there. Also make sure the password is generated randomly. You can use a couple of expressions there within the Logic app. Go and get hands-on with that and figure out what that looks like for you. When you add user to group, you want to make sure that the group ID is not hard-coded. You can have other connectors here that can get the group ID for you. This is just more so for a longevity and modularity, and just keeping hard-coding values is never a good idea, right? For the last step, you don't want to send an email to a personal email. Potentially here, if you wanted to get fancy, you could have this just send like a message to a queue or messaging services in Azure. There's a couple there. And then with that, you can figure out a safer way to get like the password and the UPN delivered to the supervisor. If you decide that email is the best, or like the more straightforward, because when it comes to security, there are pros and cons to every approach. Nothing is 100% secure. And depending on the size of the company, the restrictions, limitations, all that kind of things, email may not work. Maybe you'll have to use something like Key Vault or somewhere where you can keep secrets or things like that. But that, with more complexity means more money and all that kind of stuff, right? So it really depends on that. But just keep an eye out for like, is sending an email like a good idea? In terms of improvements, a lot of people were telling me that, I want to use Microsoft Forms. I want to like a SharePoint event or something like that. There are a bunch of triggers, whatever works best for you. Again, this is company by company basis. For a personal project, for something that you're just giving a try now to have an idea of how this works, I think HTTP request is completely fine. But I would say with this approach, if you want to continue building it, you do have to make some kind of step here that validates the information that comes in. So, you want to make sure like the email is formatted correctly, that the telephone number is valid, as in like I only had first name, last name, which you can't really validate. Or just make sure that it's like a valid first or last name, right? But things like email you can, things like phone numbers, things like city names, stuff like that. And you'll probably want to introduce a step here that will do that for you, because you don't want to create a user that doesn't have the correct information, or at least valid information, right? You could also do something like, hey, you got this request, send an email to the supervisor, hey, can you manually check if this is all right? And then they can just say yes or no, provide any updates, and then it comes back and then actually creates the user. Maybe you have two separate Logic apps. If you're using Azure APIM, then you can also include like multiple Logic apps there, a couple of options there, but just some kind of validation in that way as well. So this is just some things top of mind that you need to keep in mind for security. Moving forward, with every sort of demo that I introduce, I'm going to make sure I call it some at least very basic security things to keep in mind. But yeah, it shouldn't be sort of an afterthought. You should be building with security in mind. A big shout out to SedZek, I believe, and Daryl for just reminding me like this is really important. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video and go implement these security things. All right.